Did you know that behind the most feared military machine in history, there was a key figure, a leader who commanded respect and obedience? The leadership of Roman centurions was one of the main reasons for the rise of the Roman Empire, the largest and most powerful empire of all time. But what really made these leaders stand out? How did they manage to turn ordinary soldiers into unbeatable warriors and dominate vast territories? In this video, we'll reveal the secrets behind the iron-fisted leadership of the centurions, showing how their discipline, courage, and strategic intelligence helped build an empire that lasted for centuries. And the most interesting part, you'll discover how these leadership lessons still resonate today, inspiring great leaders around the world. Stick around until the end, because what you'll learn here will change the way you view leadership. The sun was setting over the hills of Rome, casting golden and reddish hues across the sky. In the military camp, exhausted soldiers were cleaning their weapons, celebrating the day's victory. The city was still young, and its survival depended on the strength of its warriors. But the chaos on the battlefield made the fights difficult. It took more than bravery; leadership was needed. It was then that Romulus, the founder of Rome, realized the importance of choosing men who not only fought well, but also knew how to command. Among the soldiers, one name stood out: Flavius. He wasn't just strong and skilled with a sword, but he also had something rare among warriors: strategic intelligence and the courage to act even in the most critical moments. When fear took hold, it was his voice that brought order to the chaos. He led the most dangerous attacks and protected the younger soldiers. That night, in front of all the soldiers gathered around the campfires, Romulus stood up and pointed to Flavius. "Rome needs men like you," he declared, handing him a leather belt reinforced with bronze plates, a symbol of his new position. "From today, you will command a century." Thus, the rank of centurion was born. It wasn't enough to be a good warrior. One needed discipline, intelligence, and an unshakable sense of duty. Their role was to guide and inspire soldiers, always leading the charge and being the last to retreat. Under Flavius' leadership, Rome's warriors began to fight with more organization and efficiency. Each battle became a lesson in strategy, and each victory a step closer to the empire's construction. Rome had found the key to its greatness: the figure of the centurion. Flavius looked at his men with pride. Under his leadership, the troops had learned to fight with more discipline, but there was still much to be done. Rome's army at that time was small compared to the great empires of the world. However, its strength didn't lie in numbers, but in the determination of its soldiers. At first, the Roman army consisted of 3,000 foot soldiers and 300 cavalry. They were divided into smaller groups called centuries, each under the command of a centurion. These units ensured that each soldier had a nearby leader, someone who could give quick orders and make decisions amidst the chaos of battle. War wasn't a permanent job for these men. Unlike the professional armies of later times, Rome's soldiers were ordinary citizens who picked up arms when needed. Farmers, craftsmen, and merchants would leave their lives behind to defend the city, only to return to their work afterward. Training was basic, and they often learned to fight just by observing the more experienced soldiers. Flavius knew that wasn't enough. To ensure Rome's safety, the army needed to evolve. Commanding his century, he began imposing tougher training, teaching his men to march in formation and handle their sword and shield with precision. He also demanded discipline and respect for hierarchy, understanding that an army without order was nothing more than a band of disorganized warriors. Over time, this structure began to strengthen. Each battle taught new lessons, and leaders learned to adapt their strategies. Rome's primitive army was still small, but it was in constant transformation, preparing for the challenges to come. And Flavius, the first centurion, knew he was helping to shape something much greater than himself. Years passed, and Rome grew in power and ambition. Its wars became more frequent, and the enemies more numerous. The army, still based on ancient formations, faced difficulties adapting to changes on the battlefield. It was time to evolve. Flavius, now a respected veteran, saw the flaws in the military structure up close. The rigid formations, inherited from ancient times, made movement difficult and left the troops vulnerable to ambushes and swift attacks. The army needed more flexibility, more strategy. It was then that, in the 4th century BC, a major change occurred. The maniples replaced the old block formations. Instead of a single dense line of soldiers, the maniples divided the warriors into smaller, more agile groups. Each century now had a more specific role within the battles, allowing for more efficient maneuvers and quick responses to enemy movements. Now, a centurion didn't just command a block of soldiers advancing together. They led units that could quickly reorganize as the battle demanded. This change completely transformed the way Rome fought. The legions could expand or retreat based on the situation, creating gaps for surprise attacks or closing ranks to withstand brutal assaults. Flavius and other centurions learned new tactics, adapting to a more dynamic style of warfare. Enemies soon realized that Rome was no longer just a group of disciplined warriors. It had become a war machine that perfected itself with every confrontation. Over time, the reforms made the Roman army one of the most efficient forces of antiquity. Flavius, who had once commanded men in heavy, inflexible formations, now led troops capable of moving as a single entity, reacting to the slightest sign of danger. He knew that this was just one of many changes to come, but one thing was certain: Rome would never fight the same way again. Decades passed, and Rome continued to expand. Its victories brought glory, but also new challenges. The old military system, based on citizen soldiers who fought only when needed, was no longer enough. The empire needed a permanent, disciplined army, ready to fight at any moment. It was then that, in 107 BC, Gaius Marius, a brilliant general and reformer, made a decision that would forever change the structure of the Roman army. He opened the doors of the legions to any citizen, regardless of wealth or origin. Before, only the wealthiest could afford to equip themselves for war, but now even the poorest could enlist and receive weapons from the state. The army became a profession, and with that, the importance of the centurion grew even more. Flavius, now one of the most experienced centurions, saw his role transform. If before, soldiers were men who knew life outside the battlefield, now they were warriors who would spend years, or even their entire lives, serving in the legions. This meant that training needed to be tougher, discipline stricter, and loyalty to the command absolute. Centurions became responsible not only for leading in combat, but also for shaping the new recruits into true Roman soldiers. Teaching the art of war, imposing respect, and ensuring that every man understood his duty became as important as the fight itself. Moreover, with a professional army, military campaigns would last for years, requiring more efficient organization. Centurions now had to handle supplies, marching strategies, and even troop morale, as tired and demotivated soldiers were just as dangerous as enemies on the battlefield. Thanks to Marius' reforms and the dedication of the centurions, Rome created an army that not only conquered territories, but also maintained control over them. Each battle was won not just with strength, but with discipline and strategy. And Flavius knew that more than ever, the fate of Rome was in the hands of those who commanded the front lines. With the advancement of military reforms and the growing complexity of the Roman army, the hierarchy within the legions became more organized and strategic. Flavius, now a more experienced and respected man, began to realize that leadership on the battlefield was not just about brute strength or skill with weapons. It required knowing how to position oneself within a larger structure, where order and command were essential to success. Each Roman legion was divided into 60 centurions, and all of them played crucial roles in military organization. The most important figure within this hierarchy was the primus pilus, the most experienced and prestigious centurion, who commanded the first century of the first cohort. This was a coveted position, as it represented the pinnacle of a military career. The primus pilus not only led in battle, but also supervised the other centurions, and helped ensure that orders from superior commanders were followed precisely. After 1 year of service, the primus pilus could be promoted to the equestrian order, a distinct social class that allowed the centurion to enter Roman politics. Many of the higher-ranking centurions would rise to influential political positions, giving them significant power both inside and outside the army. However, the journey to achieve the title of primus pilus was arduous. Flavius knew that few reached that position. It required much more than bravery in battle. It demanded intelligence, strategic wisdom, and the ability to maintain discipline among the soldiers, along with showing solid leadership. Every step in a centurion's career was a test of endurance, both on the battlefield and in the camp. Within the hierarchy, besides the primus pilus, there were other important ranks, such as the optio, the second in command, and the tesserarius, responsible for the guard and security of the camps. Each of these centurions had specific responsibilities, but all were essential to keep the Roman military machine running smoothly. Flavius, already highly respected for his experience and leadership, knew that, in order for Rome to remain strong and united, each centurion had to understand his role and fulfill it with precision. Every order, every movement, was part of a larger system that ensured Rome's place as one of the greatest powers in history. Over the years, Flavius saw many men rise through the ranks of the Roman army. But there was one title that shone brighter than all the others: the position of Primus Pilus, the most respected and experienced centurion of the entire legion. This rank was not earned only through strength in battle. It symbolized a rare combination of skill, wisdom, and leadership that could shape the future of Rome. The Primus Pilus commanded the first century of the first cohort, a group made up of the most veteran legionaries, those who had survived the bloodiest battles and proven themselves trustworthy. These men, under his leadership, were considered the best soldiers in the legion, and their strength lay not just in their weapon skills, but in their experience and ability to act under pressure. In addition to leading in combat, the Primus Pilus had enormous responsibility. He was the link between the Roman generals and the common soldiers, bringing orders from the high command and ensuring they were executed flawlessly. His position was strategic, not only militarily, but also politically. The Primus Pilus had access to confidential information and often made crucial decisions that could influence the outcome of a campaign. Flavius knew that reaching this position was not easy. A centurion would need years of service, but upon achieving it, he would have the chance to be promoted to the equestrian order, an elite class of Roman knights. From there, the path to Roman politics would be open. Many Primus Pilus became senators or even governors of provinces, as, in addition to their combat skills, they held considerable political power. But the road to the top was hard. For a centurion who wished to achieve the status of Primus Pilus, it required more than just bravery. It was necessary to know how to deal with the empire's bureaucracy, manage resources, and command with justice, balancing discipline and compassion. Those who could not achieve this balance were often removed from their posts. Flavius, although he had never reached the rank of Primus Pilus, felt that, over the course of his career, he had learned much from those above him. He knew that his true strength lay not only in the battles he fought, but in the legacy of leadership he would leave for future centurions. The road to the top was not easy, but those who walked it left an indelible mark on the military history of Rome. For a man like Flavius, the responsibilities of being a centurion were both a privilege and a burden. The honor of commanding a century came with a heavy load of duties, both on and off the battlefield. More than just leading in war, the centurion was responsible for the training, discipline, and well-being of his men. Early in the morning, before the sun had risen, the training field was already in full swing. Flavius organized his soldiers, assigning tasks and overseeing rigorous drills. Training the troops was not just a matter of physical strength, but also of mindset. Rome depended on the skill of its legions to remain undefeated, and Flavius knew that as a leader, he needed to ensure that each man was a well-trained machine, ready to fulfill his mission. In addition to overseeing training, the centurion was also responsible for maintaining discipline in the military camp. Every soldier knew that disobedience would not be tolerated. Flavius made sure to maintain an environment where order was respected, knowing that, without discipline, a legion would become a disorganized mass, incapable of fighting. He had the authority to impose punishments, ranging from fines to physical punishment, always with the goal of preserving the integrity of the unit. Among his responsibilities, there was also the administrative aspect. The centurions were in charge of distributing supplies, ensuring weapons were in good condition, and making sure daily routines in the camp were followed. Every detail mattered. Flavius, observing the work of other senior centurions, knew that the effectiveness of a legion depended on its leader's ability to manage the small things, which often made the difference in a decisive battle. On the battlefield, the centurion played a crucial role. He was not just a commander who pointed out where his men should fight. He was an example of courage. Flavius always put himself on the front line, fighting alongside his soldiers, showing that he did not demand more than he was capable of doing. A centurion's presence in the combat lines boosted the troops' morale and gave confidence to each legionary. The centurion led by example, guiding his men with courage and determination. But being a centurion was not just about leading in battles and training. It was also about being a mentor, a counselor. Flavius, over the years, became someone his soldiers turned to not only for military guidance, but also for personal support. The bond between a centurion and his century was often stronger than that of a family. He was, to his men, a figure of authority, but also of understanding, someone who cared deeply about the fate of each one of them. Being a centurion was, therefore, an enormous responsibility. But Flavius knew that this burden was not given to just anyone. He had been chosen because he not only had the strength needed for battle, but also the wisdom to guide his men in the right direction. The battlefield was the true test for a centurion. Flavius, with the experience gained over the years, knew that war wasn't won just with brute force, but with strategy, courage, and above all, leadership. He wasn't just a commander, but also an example to follow. Beside his soldiers, he fought fiercely, tirelessly, showing them that a true leader would never leave his men behind. As the battle neared, Flavius felt the weight of responsibility. His men looked to him for reassurance, knowing that the success of the fight depended not only on his skill with a sword, but on his ability to maintain cohesion and morale within the group. On the field, the centurion didn't stay behind the lines of combat, but was at the front, where the danger was more tangible, the risk of death higher, but also where he could show his worth most directly. Flavius led his soldiers with unwavering courage, advancing into the enemy lines with his sword in hand, guiding his men through the chaos and confusion that characterized Roman battles. Centurions were prime targets for enemies, who knew that killing the leader of a century meant destabilizing the entire unit. But Flavius never shied away from danger. His presence at the front inspired the legionaries to fight with greater fervor, knowing their commander was there beside them, willing to risk his life for them all. The leader of a century also had the task of maintaining discipline during combat. Flavius didn't just command. He also closely observed the behavior of his men. He knew that, amidst the chaos, any failure in discipline could lead to collapse. Roman units were famous for their formation and organization in battle, and it was precisely this discipline that gave them an edge over their enemies. That's why Flavius was always alert, ensuring his men stayed aligned and focused, respecting the military tactics that Rome employed with such mastery. The most critical moment of a battle was when the Roman forces needed to advance or retreat quickly. The centurion's task was to give the command and ensure his men moved as a cohesive unit. Flavius, with his experience, knew that by issuing an order, he wasn't just deciding the course of the battle, but also the fate of his soldiers. The trust he cultivated in his century meant that in the heat of battle, his men followed his orders without hesitation, as if they were a single force driven by the will to win. But Roman battles didn't always go as planned. Sometimes the enemy was stronger than expected, or the terrain favored the adversary. In those moments, the true character of a centurion was revealed. Flavius knew that, even in adversity, he had to keep calm and lead. He couldn't show fear, for that would mean his soldiers would lose confidence in him. The battle was as much a psychological game as it was physical, and the centurion understood this. He had to be resolute, even when fear tightened his heart. At the end of each fight, Flavius felt the weight of loss. Even in victory, he knew that every life lost was a tragedy. But he also understood that war was relentless, and his responsibility was to ensure that the legacy of Rome continued. And so, with each battle, he became more than a centurion. He became a living legend, a personification of the strength and discipline that had sustained the Roman Empire for centuries. Discipline was the backbone of the Roman army, and the centurion, like Flavius, was the guardian of this unyielding order. In times of peace, discipline was a fundamental pillar to keep the legion in shape and ready for war. But in the heat of battle, when chaos seemed to take over everything around, the centurion's ability to maintain that order was what separated victory from defeat. Flavius knew that the success of the legion depended largely on the rigid obedience of his troops. The military hierarchy was clear, and a centurion's orders were to be followed without question. He did not tolerate disobedience. When a soldier failed to complete a task or disobeyed an order, it was the centurion's duty to correct the mistake, no matter how difficult it was. And often, the correction wasn't easy. What Flavius understood, however, was that without discipline, the Roman army would be nothing more than a band of armed men, not a coordinated and effective war machine. Punishments for disobedience could be severe, from simple corporal punishment, like a beating, to the most extreme punishment of all, execution. The execution of a soldier was rare, but not impossible. Flavius, with the experience he had gained over the years, knew that to maintain order, sometimes it was necessary to apply drastic punishments, especially when an example needed to be made. The weight of a punishment, like execution, wasn't just for those who had erred, but also for the others, who knew that disobedience could lead to the same fate. However, Flavius also understood that authority didn't come only from punishment. The true strength of a centurion lay in his ability to inspire respect through example. He never ordered his men to do something he wasn't willing to do himself. When Flavius commanded a charge, he was at the front, sword in hand, leading his soldiers by example. This established a bond of trust between him and his men. They knew that if Flavius was willing to risk his life for them, he was worthy of their loyalty. But Flavius' authority didn't just come from his courage on the battlefield. It was his ability to stay calm, even in the most tense situations, that made him a leader admired by all. He knew how to handle pressure and made decisions with precision, without hesitation. Every movement, every order, was given with unwavering certainty. And when he spoke, his soldiers listened, for they knew he wasn't speaking on a whim, but with the knowledge of a man who understood war in all its facets. When the battle was over, Flavius returned to the camp, where his authority continued to be essential. Tasks were distributed, repairs were made, and preparations for the next battle began, all under the centurion's watch. On the field, Flavius was the one who ensured order and discipline among his men, but he was also the one who motivated them, keeping morale high and focus on the ultimate goal. Discipline was unrelenting, but it wasn't synonymous with cruelty. Flavius knew that authority had to be balanced with humanity. He didn't see his soldiers as mere tools of war, but as men who fought by his side, who were willing to risk their lives for the greatness of Rome. Thus, he sought to be just in his decisions, offering rewards when deserved and being firm when necessary. But above all, Flavius understood that, without discipline, the legion would disintegrate. Obedience was what united the men, what allowed them to function as a cohesive, unstoppable unit. And he, as a centurion, was the pillar that kept it all standing, day and night, in every battle, on every march, in every moment of his life. The training of a centurion didn't begin the moment he received the title, but long before, in the ranks of the army, when he was still an ordinary legionary. Flavius, like so many others, began his journey as a common soldier. He knew that, to stand out and eventually reach the position of centurion, it would take more than just physical strength. It would require courage, tactical intelligence, and above all, a rare leadership ability. The path to becoming a centurion was arduous and demanding. Selection wasn't based solely on bravery in combat, but on a soldier's ability to command and motivate others. Training involved everything from honing combat skills to understanding the most complex military strategies. Future centurions were taught to make quick and precise decisions, to understand the logistics of military campaigns, and to apply formation tactics with the soldiers under their command. But the true test of a centurion was his ability to maintain discipline among his men. In training, Flavius was constantly tested to ensure that he was not only able to fight with skill, but also to command with firmness. He was forced to undergo battle simulations where quick decisions had to be made under pressure, while leading his troops with unquestionable authority. And above all, Flavius had to learn to manage his emotions, as well as those of his men. A centurion couldn't be overly emotional. Coldness and objectivity were essential. Physical training was also crucial. Future centurions underwent exhausting exercises like running, long marches, and maneuvers with heavy armor. They were taught to fight in both individual and group combat, constantly challenged to improve their skills. Every movement was repeated until it was performed flawlessly. The goal was to create soldiers who could withstand the physical wear and tear of battles and fight for long hours without losing strength or focus. The selection for the position of centurion was strict. Those who stood out for their combat skill, but most importantly for their leadership, were closely observed by senior officers. Being chosen for the position wasn't a matter of luck, but of merit. Flavius, for example, had been noticed for his ability to keep his comrades motivated during long marches and for his skill in resolving conflicts within the legion. He always stood out for his strong presence and the way he commanded with fairness, but without losing authority. In addition, there was an extra requirement: experience. A centurion couldn't be someone recently promoted without knowledge of the battlefield. He had to have years of service as a legionary, where he would learn all aspects of military life, from basic training to real combat experience. By the time Flavius was promoted, he had already shown, over the years, that he had the endurance, leadership spirit, and skills necessary to command his men. There was also constant pressure to maintain the qualities that led to the promotion. Once the rank of centurion was achieved, the responsibility increased, and any serious mistake could result in a quick fall from grace. Promotion was not just a recognition of success, but an increase in expectations. For this reason, Flavius never rested on the laurels of his promotion. He continued to train with his men, participating in combat simulations, reviewing tactics, and always staying ready for whatever was to come. However, a centurion's training wasn't a solitary task. He also needed a support network within the legion. Other, more experienced centurions served as mentors, helping the newer ones adjust to the role and learn from the failures of others. Learning was continuous, and sharing experiences was a crucial part of a centurion's development. Finally, the training didn't only involve the physical or the mind, but also ethics and morals. Flavius learned early on that loyalty to Rome and to his men was the foundation of his mission. Every centurion knew that he could not stray from these principles without risking not just his career, but the empire he had sworn to protect. Thus, a centurion's training, though exhausting and challenging, shaped leaders capable of maintaining the strength and stability of the Roman army, ensuring the Roman Empire for generations to come. When Flavius donned his armor, it wasn't just for protection on the battlefield, but to convey authority. The centurion's uniform was undoubtedly one of the most striking aspects of his position. Every detail of his attire served to highlight not only his role within the legion, but also his status. The helmet, for example, was a masterpiece of military engineering, designed to protect without compromising vision or hearing. But what really caught the eye was the transverse crest, made of colorful feathers, an unmistakable mark that signified someone of high rank. Flavius loved his helmet, especially because it made him feel invincible. The crest wasn't just decorative. It symbolized his role as a leader, a warrior ready to charge into battle, always at the front with his men. The way the helmet shone in the sun was a signal to his soldiers, and also to enemies, that the centurion was not just a distant commander, but an active warrior, willing to sacrifice himself for his legion. Flavius' armor was also remarkable. Instead of the chainmail worn by regular soldiers, he wore a breastplate meticulously carved, adorned with details that symbolized both his combat skill and his experience. The breastplate was made to withstand sword and spear blows, but also served as a symbol of prestige. It was custom-made, fitting perfectly to his muscular body, allowing freedom of movement without sacrificing protection. The back of his breastplate was engraved with the emblem of the legion, a visual representation of Rome's power. Moreover, Flavius' boots were designed to endure long marches, but also to make him agile in combat. He knew that, as a centurion, speed was a crucial advantage, not only for attacking but also for coordinating his troops on the battlefield. The lower part of his outfit included a red wool tunic, which, though simple, displayed the characteristic color of Rome, a reminder of the blood spilled by soldiers over generations to keep the empire strong. However, what Flavius valued most about his uniform was its symbolic weight. Every piece of his attire carried the story of his rise, his battles won, and the sacrifices made. When he entered the battlefield, he wasn't just wearing armor for protection. He was wearing Rome, representing the power of an empire that ruled the known world. And when Flavius walked through the streets of Rome, his appearance was equally striking. The presence of a centurion in his shining armor was something to be admired, and he knew that his image carried deep meaning, both for civilians and for his own soldiers. To his men, he was the symbol of strength and leadership. To the Romans, he was the embodiment of the discipline and order that allowed the empire to thrive. In war, a centurion's attire served both a practical and strategic function. It also acted as a psychological tool, both for allies and enemies. Roman soldiers wore their armor with pride, and enemies, when facing them, knew they weren't fighting mere men, but a disciplined, unbeatable war machine, led by men like Flavius. However, the armor, though heavy, wasn't what made a centurion feared. What made a man like Flavius respected by all was his presence on the battlefield and the respect he commanded. But without a doubt, his uniform made him an imposing figure, an extension of Rome, inspiring his soldiers to fight with the same determination he showed. Flavius was not only known for his courage and leadership, but also for his weaponry, which was both an extension of his personality and a tool of power on the battlefield. Every piece of his arsenal was chosen not only for its functionality, but for the symbolic and strategic importance it carried. The gladius, the short sword he wielded, was his most trusted companion. With its sharp blade and compact size, it was perfect for close combat, where space was tight and precision became vital. Flavius, like any centurion, knew that the gladius was not just a weapon, but a symbol of Rome's military effectiveness. When he wielded the gladius, his movements were swift and decisive. The blade sliced with agility, delivering precise strikes that always aimed for vital points. Unlike the legionaries, who typically used the sword in their right hand, the centurion carried his on the left side, a tactic that allowed him to make better use of his dominant hand and also protect his more vulnerable side. The gladius was always within reach, ready to be drawn at any moment, whether to attack or defend. For Flavius, each strike represented not only the defense of the empire, but the responsibility of his position as a leader. Along with the gladius, Flavius also carried a dagger, a smaller weapon but no less lethal. The dagger was used for close combat, when space and speed were more important than brute strength. Flavius kept it on his thigh, always ready to be used if needed. In a fight, the dagger was often the difference between life and death, a perfect weapon for intimate and dangerous confrontations. Another essential item for a centurion was the spear. While spears were common among the legionaries, Flavius, as a leader, had a spear with a more sophisticated design, adapted for his position. The spear was not only a long-range weapon, but also a symbol of authority. It was with it that Flavius could maintain control of the front line, commanding his men strategically. During battles, he used the spear not only to attack, but also to coordinate his soldiers, ensuring that the legion's formation remained cohesive and unbeatable. Lastly, there was the vine staff. This weapon, seemingly simple, was actually a profound symbol of the centurion's authority. Made of hard wood and adorned with small carvings, the staff was used not to kill but to punish. During discipline periods in the camp, the staff was the tool the centurion used to ensure his soldiers maintained order and obedience. Although the use of physical punishments was an extreme measure, the vine staff represented the centurion's ability to uphold discipline, essential for the functioning of the Roman army. Flavius knew that his weapons were not just objects of combat, but also instruments of control and influence. Each one carried a symbolic weight, representing his responsibility over the men under his command. He wielded the gladius and spear with skill, but it was the vine staff that reminded everyone who was in charge and that respect and obedience were crucial for the army's cohesion. His armament was not just a collection of war tools, but an extension of his own authority and leadership. In battle, Flavius was a formidable sight, not only because of his skill with weapons, but also due to the confidence the tools gave him. Every move was calculated, each strike a reminder of his experience and power. His soldiers knew that with him leading, they were in good hands, and his enemies would soon learn that by facing him, they were challenging the unbeatable strength of the Roman army. Flavius' shield was not just protection against enemy blows, but also a symbol of his position as a centurion. Its surface, polished and sturdy, reflected the sunlight impressively, making it visible even from a distance. Unlike the simple shields of the legionaries, Flavius was adorned with the inscription of his legion and the emblem of Rome. An eagle, its wings spread, representing the empire's expansion and power. Every time he raised his shield, it was as though Rome itself was rising before the enemies. The Roman shields, known as scutum, were large, rectangular, and designed to protect the soldier from all kinds of attacks. For a centurion like Flavius, the shield had special significance. Not only did it protect him, but it also allowed him to form the famous testudo formation, or turtle formation, where soldiers would unite, aligning their shields to create an almost impenetrable barrier. It was through this formation that Flavius and his legion faced the fiercest assaults, and his shield, alongside the others, was a solid defense against any threat. But what truly set Flavius' shield apart, beyond its functionality, were the insignias. As a centurion, he wore heavy medallions and necklaces given to soldiers as recognition for bravery in combat. These medallions, usually made of precious metals and engraved with symbols of achievements, hung around Flavius' neck and rested on his cuirass. Each medallion told a story of past victories, bloody battles he had overcome, and the authority he had earned throughout his career. When he moved, the medallions jingled softly, reminding everyone around him of the prestige he carried. In addition, Flavius also wore special insignias on his shield. representing his status and role within the legion. These insignias were symbols of command, leadership, and honor. When a soldier saw these marks, they knew they were facing someone who not only commanded, but was also a living example of what it meant to be part of the Roman army. On the front line, Flavius' shield was always visible, distinguishing him from the others. He was not just a centurion, he was the embodiment of Rome, represented in metal and bronze. His shield gleamed with emblems and insignias that showed his dedication to the empire, his bravery in battle, and his commitment to discipline and order. As he led his men into battle, his shields were not just tools of defense. They were also declarations of his loyalty to Rome and his position of authority. The insignias on the shield also played a psychological role. For his enemies, seeing Flavius' shield was a terrifying sight. They knew they were facing an experienced leader, a centurion whose presence was a harbinger that Rome was about to triumph. For his own soldiers, Flavius' shield was a beacon of hope and strength. It represented the certainty that under his leadership, victory was not only possible but inevitable. The combination of Flavius' shield and insignias made him an imposing figure, not only in appearance but also in spirit. Every element of his equipment told a story of Rome, power, and discipline. When he moved across the field, with the shield at the front and the medallions shining in the sun, he was not just a soldier. He was the empire itself incarnate. With his experience in the field and his cunning as a leader, Flavius knew that the battle was not only fought on the warfields, but also in the fortresses and military camps where his legions prepared for what was to come. When the march was over and the Roman army needed to establish a safe camp, the role of the centurion expanded beyond direct battle. He became the architect of survival, responsible for ensuring that the soldiers were well protected, organized, and ready for the next attack. In every campaign, Flavius led his men in building fortifications. His practical experience and the rigorous training of his soldiers made the work quick and efficient. As night fell, the first task was always the construction of the camp, a line of defense that would ensure the safety of the troops as they slept or prepared for the next move. The Roman army, with its unbeatable discipline, knew that the integrity of the camp was crucial to the protection of the soldiers and the structure of the army. The camps were built with precision and systematically. Flavius, as a centurion, oversaw the digging of trenches around the camp, a line of defense that made it difficult for any enemy to approach during the night. The primary task of a centurion at this point was to coordinate the allocation of forces to ensure that every vulnerable point was properly protected. He commanded his soldiers to dig and erect wooden walls, creating a solid barrier that ensured the legion would be prepared for any surprise. While some centurions supervised the construction of fortifications, others were tasked with protecting the standards of the legions. These sacred symbols of Rome were not only emblems of honor, but also represented the soul of the legion. If a standard were captured or lost, it would be an indelible stain on the army. Flavius deeply understood this responsibility and did not allow his men to neglect the protection of these standards. The centurion and his troops were tireless, ensuring that these symbols of Rome were kept safe at all costs. Flavius also understood the strategic importance of fortifications during sieges. When his legion faced an enemy that refused to yield, the construction of temporary defenses and the maintenance of a secure camp became crucial. The work of fortifications was not just defensive, it also had a strategic dimension. Every trench, every wooden or stone wall, every forward post around the camp was part of a larger plan to ensure survival and victory. Fortifications were not only necessary during combat. During periods of rest, Flavius commanded the creation of observation posts where trained soldiers stood watch, ready to detect any enemy movement. These posts were strategically placed to offer a broad view of the surrounding area, allowing the centurion to make quick and informed decisions. As always, he led by example, never asking his men to do something he wasn't willing to do himself. Over the course of the campaigns, Flavius' fortifications became synonymous with efficiency and success. His camps were known for their impeccable organization and the security they provided to the soldiers. He knew that a well-fortified camp not only protected the troops, but also kept morale high. His men knew that with Flavius leading the construction, they were in good hands. The meticulous preparation of each camp and the unbeatable protection of the fortifications were, in fact, part of what made the Roman army such a formidable war machine. When the soldiers finally sat around the campfire after an exhausting day, Flavius would sit in his tent, watching the field and fortifications with a keen eye. He knew that true victory didn't come just from strength in battle, but from the ability to prepare and protect his legion, maintaining the order and discipline that the Roman army valued so much. Flavius' leadership wasn't limited to the battlefield. His cleverness and insight went far beyond direct combat. He understood deeply that often victory lay in strategic planning and the intelligent use of information. In the context of the Roman Empire, the centurion had a crucial role that involved not only leading the soldiers, but also gathering military intelligence, anticipating the enemy's movements, and ensuring Rome always had a strategic advantage. With his combat experience and sharp instincts, Flavius was frequently tasked with leading reconnaissance missions. These missions, which required a keen eye on the terrain and enemy movements, were essential to the success of any campaign. Alongside his most trusted troops, he ventured into unknown territory, moving stealthily through forests or along riverbanks, gathering vital information that could save lives and guarantee the success of an assault. Flavius understood that gathering information was one of the cornerstones of Roman strategy. When in enemy territory, Flavius and his small unit would not only observe the movements of enemy troops, but also assess the terrain, weather, and even the enemy's supply conditions. This information was critical for the Roman commander to plan an attack, or even choose the right moment for a strategic retreat. The knowledge Flavius gathered was not limited to his immediate group. He knew that by reporting his findings to higher command, his contribution could change the course of an entire campaign. In addition to being a master of reconnaissance missions, Flavius had an even greater responsibility: protecting the senior officers and ensuring the safety of supply routes. During campaigns, controlling resources was a critical point for any army. If supply lines were interrupted or attacked, the entire military force could be compromised. Flavius oversaw convoy escorts, ensuring that food, equipment, and other supplies reached the soldiers safely, without being detected or destroyed by the enemy. One of his main responsibilities, however, was the safety of the standards and Roman symbols. These symbols were vital to the troops' morale and represented the strength of Rome. During any movement, Flavius ensured the standards were well protected and that no one approached without being identified. He knew that without these sacred emblems, the legion would lose its identity and strength. Additionally, intelligence missions often involved intercepting enemy messages, and Flavius was always on the lookout for the opportunity to capture or destroy enemy communications. Sometimes, Flavius was also called for secret missions, those involving infiltration into enemy territory to obtain crucial information. These moments required immense courage and the ability to move undetected. Flavius always excelled in these types of missions, whether disguising himself among civilians or creating clever maneuvers to outwit the enemies. These silent and risky missions were critical to the success of major battles, and Flavius knew that the secret to victory lay as much in his ability to fight as in his skill to maneuver in the shadows. Furthermore, during the empire's expansion, centurions like Flavius played an even more strategic role, handling information about distant enemy movements. They often had to anticipate the actions of armies from other nations, relying on reports from spies or information captured from prisoners. This need for intelligence extended beyond the Roman borders, requiring a network of spies and informants who worked tirelessly for Rome. When Flavius returned from a reconnaissance mission or a supply route protection task, he brought more than just field information. He brought detailed reports about the enemy, the weather, the terrain, and any changes that could alter the Romans' plans. This information was crucial for generals and higher commanders, and Flavius knew that his precision and clarity could decisively influence the course of the war. Over time, Flavius' ability to gather and interpret information became known to his superiors, and his position within the legion grew even stronger. He was not just a commander of troops, but also a leader who mastered the art of military intelligence, ensuring that Rome remained one step ahead of its enemies. Flavius' prestige did not go unnoticed. After years of dedicated service on the empire's borders, he received an offer that many centurions considered the pinnacle of their career. Promotion to the Praetorian Guard, the elite force of the Roman army tasked with protecting the emperor and maintaining order within Rome. This change was a milestone, as members of the Praetorian Guard were considered more than soldiers. They were the guardians of the empire's very stability. Upon being transferred to the Praetorian Guard, Flavius felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The Praetorian Guard was not just an ordinary military force. It was an elite unit whose primary mission was to ensure the emperor's safety and protect the centers of power in Rome. The soldiers of this guard had a nearly untouchable status, with privileges that other centurions could only dream of. However, these came with immense challenges and dangers, as they were always in the line of fire of conspiracies, intrigues, and internal power struggles. Flavius' path to the Praetorian Guard was a blend of military conquest and political skill. The trust placed in him came not only from his combat abilities, but also from his capacity to handle the political and diplomatic tensions that arose within the capital. While many viewed a position in the Praetorian Guard as a reward, it was also a place where loyalty could be tested. Flavius knew that more than ever, he would need to demonstrate his courage and wisdom to protect the emperor, who often found himself surrounded by betrayal. Within the Praetorian Guard, Flavius got a close look at how Roman power functioned. Meetings with senior officers, direct contact with the emperor, and involvement in courts where important decisions were made became part of his daily routine. He understood that politics and war intertwined in Rome in complex ways. While he was a military leader, Flavius began learning the ways of politics, observing the power plays that occurred behind the scenes, and how each decision made by an emperor could affect the future of the empire. With his combat experience and ability to observe the dynamics between powerful figures in Rome, Flavius quickly stood out among his fellow Praetorians. He knew that protecting the emperor wasn't just about safeguarding his physical life, but also ensuring the stability of the empire. Political intrigues, assassination attempts, and conspiracies were constant, and the centurion became an expert in detecting signs of betrayal or discontent among the members of the guard and the court. Over the years, Flavius' loyalty to the emperor was tested many times. He witnessed moments of vulnerability in power, with coups and internal disputes threatening to destabilize Rome. Though the Praetorian Guard was a powerful force, not all its members were unquestioningly loyal to the emperor. There were factions within the guard that opposed certain decisions of the emperor or had their own ambitions to seize power. Flavius, however, remained steadfast in his loyalty to Rome and the emperor, knowing that his mission was bigger than any internal rivalry. During his time in the Praetorian Guard, Flavius had the opportunity to protect the emperor through some of the most intense crises the empire had faced. He led elite teams to quell uprisings, secure the borders, and maintain order in the streets of Rome. On several occasions, his combat prowess and decisive leadership prevented the empire from being shaken by revolts or attacks from internal enemies. His firm stance and commitment to loyalty made him one of the most respected centurions in the guard, and his influence within the unit grew even further. In addition to protecting the emperor, the Praetorian Guard also had a crucial responsibility: maintaining public order in Rome. As the city was the heart of the empire, any disturbance in the streets could have immense consequences. Flavius, now immersed in this multifaceted role, was often seen in the streets of Rome, leading patrols, ensuring the population was at peace, and keeping order during times of political unrest. His experience in the Praetorian Guard also served as a gateway to a new level of power. After years of service, Flavius had the opportunity to join the elite ranks of the Evocati, retired soldiers who continued to serve voluntarily for the emperor. The status of an evocatus came with several benefits, including a position in the equestrian order, which allowed Flavius to interact with the political elite of Rome. Thus, he grew closer to Roman politics, gaining a better understanding of how the power game played out in the Senate's halls and among the emperors. However, unlike many of his colleagues, Flavius never forgot his roots as a centurion. Although he was now in a position of great influence, he remained true to the principles that had guided him during his early days in the Roman army: courage, loyalty, and the commitment to Rome's greatness. Even amidst political disputes and constant threats to imperial power, Flavius never allowed his character to be corrupted. He knew that, as long as he was in the Praetorian Guard, his main mission was to ensure the empire continued to thrive and protect the safety and stability of Rome, whether with his sword in hand or his sharp strategic mind. The Roman Empire, though vast and powerful, was far from immune to internal intrigue and revolutionary movements. During Flavius' time in the Praetorian Guard, one of the greatest threats to the empire's stability emerged in the form of a revolt led by Saturninus, a military tribune with aspirations to seize power. Saturninus, who had initially been an ally of the emperor, felt that his own ambitions were being frustrated. He began to gain support among the troops and, treacherously, tried to use them to destabilize the government. His revolt aimed not only to overthrow the emperor, but also to take control of the Roman power machine. To do so, he needed the support of the Praetorian Guard, a unit with enormous influence as it controlled access to the emperor and the city of Rome. Flavius, now an experienced and respected centurion, knew that loyalty to the emperor was more important than anything else. Saturninus' revolt was not only a threat to the emperor's leadership, but also to the unity and stability of Rome itself. To Flavius, what was at stake was not just the fate of one man, but the future of the empire he had served for so many years. He knew that, in times of crisis like this, loyalties needed to be clear and unshakable. Aware of the repercussions of the revolt, Flavius decided to act swiftly. He called upon the most loyal soldiers of the Praetorian Guard and began to plan a strategy to dismantle Saturninus' movement. His approach was simple yet effective. He knew that brute force might not be enough to defeat Saturninus directly, especially if he had already gained the support of some military units. What he needed was to destabilize the support Saturninus had among the troops and cut the backbone of the movement, which was his influence over the soldiers. Flavius and his allies in the Praetorian Guard began spreading information that Saturninus was seeking to ally with Rome's enemies, and that his revolt threatened to destroy everything the Roman Empire stood for. This misinformation campaign was carefully orchestrated to sow doubt among the soldiers following Saturninus, making them question whether they were truly fighting for Rome's greatness or just to satisfy one man's ambition. Additionally, Flavius quickly mobilized the most loyal units to secure strategic points within the city of Rome, ensuring that Saturninus and his followers could not receive reinforcements or escape. When the revolt finally erupted into a series of violent clashes inside and outside the walls of Rome, Flavius found himself at the center of the battle. He led his troops with courage, facing off against Saturninus' followers, who were willing to use force to seize power. Flavius, however, knew that the key to victory was cohesion and strategy, not just direct confrontation. As the fighting intensified, Flavius approached Saturninus, who was attempting to flee the city with his supporters. In a decisive move, Flavius ordered the city gates to be closed and all escape routes blocked. The revolt was crushed within days. Saturninus, seeing himself with no options, attempted to negotiate, but Flavius and his allies knew that any deal with the traitors would signify weakness on the part of the emperor. The sentence was swift. Saturninus and his followers were captured, judged, and punished. Flavius' loyalty to the emperor was one of the pillars that ensured the stability of the empire after the revolt. His decision to maintain discipline and safeguard Rome's security during the crisis solidified his position as one of the most respected centurions in the Praetorian Guard. Even when the crisis was resolved, he did not seek the limelight, but continued to serve Rome with the same commitment and dedication. This episode of the revolt of Saturninus left a deep mark on Flavius' journey. He became a symbol of loyalty and resilience in the face of internal threats, understanding that the true strength of Rome lay in the loyalty of its soldiers, not just in their weapons. With the revolt crushed, Flavius demonstrated that his strategic vision and courage were not limited to the battlefield, but also extended to preserving the political and social stability of the empire. The Roman Empire, one of the most grandiose and powerful civilizations in history, began to experience a slow but inevitable decline in the later centuries. The borders became more difficult to control, enemies began to close in, and internal tensions were eroding the stability of the imperial structure itself. The role of the centurions, the pillars of Rome's military power, was also altered in this crisis context. As external pressures increased, with barbarian invasions and ongoing conflicts along the borders, the empire faced growing difficulties in maintaining its cohesion. The legions, once a symbol of organization and discipline, began to fragment. Many centurions, who had once been figures of leadership, now found themselves powerless in the face of increasing instability. Flavius, now a seasoned veteran, watched with concern what was happening. He, who had once been among the key figures responsible for maintaining order and discipline within the legions, realized that something was being lost. The new recruits, motivated by personal interests or the promise of higher pay, did not share the same loyalty and dedication as the old legionaries. Many soldiers were more interested in the immediate rewards of quick victories, forgetting the honor that came with long-term service to the empire. The decay of military leadership became a direct reflection of the political decay of the Roman Empire. The Senate and the emperors, once respected, were now increasingly distant from the realities of the battlefield. Corruption spread like a cancer in the upper echelons, and the centurions, who had always been the mediators between the soldiers and their superiors, began to lose their influence. In place of discipline, the distribution of favors and internal corruption began to gain strength. Flavius, amidst these difficult times, realized that his own position was no longer the same. The structure of the legions began to crumble under the pressure of multiple crises. While the soldiers of the empire became demotivated, enemies such as the Huns, Vandals, and Goths were getting closer, attacking the empire's provinces with devastating ferocity. The heart of Rome was being threatened, and the figure of the centurion, once filled with prestige and respect, began to fade away like the shadows of night heralding the end of an empire. Flavius knew that, in the end, the collapse of Rome was not just the collapse of an army. It was the collapse of a vision, a military culture that had once kept the empire united. Although he continued to serve with honor and courage, he felt deep down that his efforts would not be enough to prevent what seemed like an inevitable fall. As the situation deteriorated, many centurions, like Flavius, began to realize that their role no longer held the same relevance. Some still tried to maintain the structure of the legions, but the lack of resources and the weakening of imperial leadership made these attempts futile. In no time, the Roman armies, once disciplined and unbeatable, were as disorganized as the institutions of the empire itself. The end of the age of the centurions was approaching, not only because the legions were disintegrating, but because the very foundation of Rome's power was crumbling. Flavius, though aware of his unwavering loyalty to the empire, couldn't help but reflect on the changes he had witnessed. He knew that the Rome he had served and defended was no longer the same. His figure, that of a military leader, was becoming a relic of a glorious past, while the future of the empire grew ever more uncertain. In the end, the Western Roman Empire fell, and with it, the figure of the centurion, a symbol of power that no longer existed. The soldiers who had once followed the orders of their centurions were now scattered, and Rome, without its solid military foundations, lost its control. The Praetorian Guard, once responsible for protecting the emperor, also disappeared, and Rome itself, without the strength of its legions, disintegrated. The legacy of the centurions, though gone with the collapse of the empire, was not forgotten. Their stories and feats continue to resonate in historical memory. The values of discipline, loyalty, and courage, which marked their careers, influenced future generations of leaders and armies, making them symbols of an era that, though it came to an end, will never be completely erased. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the world witnessed the rise of new powers, but the impact of the centurion figure never disappeared completely. What had been a model of discipline, loyalty, and courage continued to reverberate through the generations, with many aspects of Roman military legacy being adopted by later cultures. In different parts of Europe and beyond, the core Roman values, especially military organization, strict discipline, and well-defined hierarchy, became references for the formation of new armies. Although the Roman Empire had crumbled, what the centurions represented, in terms of leadership and command, endured for many centuries. For instance, during the medieval period, knights fighting in the Crusades, many of whom came from different parts of Europe, displayed strong similarities with the ancient Roman legionaries, particularly in discipline and rigorous training. The idea of a commander leading by courage and example, like the centurion, was passed down to future generations of military leaders. This figure remained alive in military tactics and philosophies. The military hierarchy also persisted as one of the great contributions of the Romans to the Western world. The concept of senior commanders with subordinates organized into units, as well as the crucial role of lower-level leaders, continued to influence the organization of armies. The position of intermediate commander, essentially a role dating back to the centurion, remained in the armed forces of many nations, with officers responsible for coordinating, training, and motivating their troops. Moreover, the concept of the legion spread to various cultures. Although Roman units were composed of thousands of men, the principle of tactically cohesive combat units, led by a commander responsible for training and troop morale, remained a constant. Modern armies, across different parts of the world, still adopt many of the tactics the Romans perfected, including the use of close formations and the importance of communication between different levels of command. Another legacy of the Centurions was respect for military authority. The idea that the leader must be the first to enter battle and the last to leave became an unwritten rule in many military traditions. The figure of the courageous leader committed to his men remains an example of how command can be effective when there is mutual trust between leader and subordinates. However, the legacy of the Centurions was not limited to the military field. The idea of a moral and ethical code of conduct, the importance of commitment to discipline, and the development of character were also transmitted over the centuries. Even in times of peace, the values that defined the Centurions influenced civilian leadership, with many men and women adopting the principles of honor, responsibility, and justice that were essential to the Romans. In times of crisis or war, figures of command, based on their virtues, were crucial in maintaining social cohesion and the morale of nations. Throughout history, we also see how the figure of the centurion was immortalized in various narratives. Writers, historians, and filmmakers have perpetuated the stories of courage, sacrifice, and loyalty of the centurions. Movies and books about Rome, such as those depicting the Roman Empire era, continue to popularize the idea that centurions were figures of respect and leadership, with their importance being recognized even today. Even in modern times, the name centurion remains evocative. Many military regiments, schools, and even companies use the title to reflect the spirit of determination, leadership, and strength that the ancient Roman soldiers represented. The term continues to be associated with authority and command in various spheres. In the end, the centurions of Rome were not only warriors or leaders of an invincible army. They were symbols of an era that shaped military and cultural history in a definitive way. Their influence, far from disappearing with the fall of the Roman Empire, transcended centuries, inspiring future generations and remaining as a model of leadership that would be remembered for millennia. Maximinus Thrax began his journey as a mere soldier, an unknown name among the military of the Roman Empire. His path was that of many, an ordinary man in a world of giants, where only the most extraordinary could achieve something worthy of remembrance. But unlike many, he had something in his soul that set him apart, a fierce determination and a vision of power that drove him to go beyond what most could imagine. At first, Maximinus was a robust and respected centurion, with an impressive leadership ability and immeasurable bravery on the battlefield. He stood out not only for his physical strength, but for his skill in motivating and commanding his men, which earned him an uncommon respect among the soldiers. His authority came not only from his position, but from the way he placed himself alongside his men, always ready to fight at the front lines. But what really made Maximinus remarkable was not just his physical strength or command, but his relentless ambition. He knew that the power of Rome was not only forged in battles, but also in the intricate webs of politics. That young soldier of humble origin began to realize that true power came from the ability to manipulate circumstances and place oneself at the center of decision-making. Maximinus began to rise rapidly through the ranks of the Roman army. His strategic ability in combat and his capacity to handle his troops' issues catching the attention of his superiors. He knew how to please the leaders, but also had a sharp eye for identifying the flaws of his enemies. However, what truly set him apart from the others was his incredible political ambition. Throughout his career, Maximinus made powerful friends, as well as formidable enemies. He used these connections to his advantage, weaving a network of alliances and strategies that would place him in a unique position. It was with this cunning that he approached one of the greatest moments of his life, the opportunity to become Emperor of Rome. When Emperor Alexander Severus was assassinated in 235 AD, Maximinus, who had already achieved a prominent position in the army, was proclaimed emperor by the military. His rise to power was no trivial feat. He was not a senator or a noble, but a man of the people, a soldier who knew how to gain the trust of his troops and manipulate Roman politics to his advantage. His ascension was living proof that in the Roman Empire, the path to power often depended more on strength and military skill than on the ancient political families. Maximinus Thrax came to power with a loyal army and a determination that defied any adversity. His reign, however, was marked by extreme brutality and a series of military reforms aimed at consolidating his power. His regime, although focused on reinforcing the empire's authority and increasing his personal authority, also generated a great deal of opposition due to its authoritarian nature and disregard for Roman political traditions. Maximinus was seen as a tyrant, often cruel, who imposed his rule through fear. Despite this, he also ensured that his troops gained more rights, being better paid and respected. However, the reforms, the disagreements with the Senate, and his governing style led to the multiplication of his enemies, both within the empire and among the local populations. His reign of fear, which initially seemed to guarantee the empire's stability, quickly became a burden to him. His figure, once symbolizing strength and leadership, began to disintegrate as the Romans grew tired of his tyranny. In 238 AD, Maximinus was assassinated by his own troops, who were already fed up with his harsh rule. His reign, although short, showed how powerful individual ambitions could be within such a vast and complex empire as Rome. Maximinus Thrax's legacy, however, remains as an example of how an ordinary centurion, through exceptional leadership skills and unshakable determination, could achieve the highest positions of power. His rise to the throne of emperor and his tragic fall remind us that in Rome, power was never guaranteed, and even the most powerful leaders were at the mercy of the principles of loyalty and distrust that always permeated the empire's intricate dynamics. In 9 AD, the Roman Empire suffered one of its greatest defeats in the Germanic lands, in the Teutoburg Forest, when 3 Roman legions were completely destroyed by an alliance of Germanic tribes led by Arminius, a former Roman auxiliary. Arminius, who had been educated among the Romans, used his knowledge of the imperial army to ambush the Roman army, which was unprepared for the rugged terrain and the tactics of the Germanic warriors. The Roman commander, Quintilius Varus, was caught off guard, and the legions were annihilated, with nearly all the soldiers killed or captured. The battle was a devastating blow to Rome, both militarily and psychologically. Augustus, the Roman emperor, was deeply shaken by the loss of about 20,000 soldiers, and the empire's morale suffered a significant impact. As a result, Rome was forced to retreat to the Rhine River, establishing it as the new frontier of the empire and abandoning its attempts to expand further into Germania. This defeat also led to a revision of Roman military strategy in the region. For the Germanic tribes, the victory was symbolic and historic. Arminius was seen as a hero who challenged and defeated a global power. Although the alliance of Germanic tribes he formed dissolved after his victory, the battle became an icon of Germanic resistance. The episode also had a lasting impact on Roman history, showing that even the most powerful empire in the world could be defeated and that the Germanic tribes could resist Roman expansion. As the centuries passed and the Roman Empire declined, the Roman military structure began to change, and the role of the centurions gradually weakened. During the 3rd century AD, the empire faced a series of internal crises and external threats, which began to destabilize the old military machine. The Roman army, once a model of discipline and organization, gradually lost its cohesion as the recruitment of mercenaries and military reforms replaced the old traditions. Over time, the centurion system, which had been the foundation of the Roman military hierarchy, began to disappear. The empire, now more fragmented and financially strained, could no longer sustain the level of training and the strict command that had been characteristic of the original Roman centurions. The professionalization of the army gave way to an increasing number of contracted soldiers, many of whom did not share the same level of loyalty and discipline as the original Roman centurions. The empire came to rely on large contingents of mercenaries, which weakened the power of the traditional hierarchical structure. The end of the era of the centurions reflected the collapse of the imperial structure in the West itself. The empire, no longer able to maintain control over its vast borders, saw the fall of the city of Rome in 476 AD, a symbolic event that marked the end of the Western Roman Empire. Without the leadership of experienced centurions, the Roman legions lost much of their prestige and effectiveness, becoming a shadow of the army that had once been the most feared force in the ancient world. Despite the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the legacy of the centurion continued to influence many military structures throughout history. The figure of the centurion, with his strict discipline, respected leadership, and strategic skills, remained a symbol of efficient command and battlefield excellence. Even after the fall of Rome, their combat tactics and military organization were studied and adapted by various empires and armies, being incorporated into armed forces around the world. Throughout the Middle Ages, many feudal lords and military leaders looked to the Roman model of organization and command as an important reference. The role of high-ranking military leaders, such as generals and commanders, reflected the hierarchical structure of the Roman legions, and even some of the tactics used by the centurions were adapted in subsequent wars. In fact, the Roman legion became a model of excellence for armed forces for many centuries, and its impact can be seen in modern military organizations. Moreover, the figure of the centurion was so prominent in Roman culture that it continues to be celebrated in literature, cinema, and art. Depictions of centurions in historical films and books reinforce the image of an unbeatable soldier, imbued with honor and courage. Even in modern times, the centurion remains a cultural icon, reminding everyone of the importance of command and leadership in times of adversity. So, what did you think of the story of the centurions and their impact on ancient Rome? Leave your opinion in the comments below, as we love hearing what you think. Don't forget to give a thumbs up, which really helps the channel grow, and subscribe so you don't miss the upcoming videos full of fascinating content about ancient Rome and much more. Hit the bell to receive notifications whenever new videos are posted. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.